longer to see in kind of more complicated ways. And one of the conclusions we came to is that the King of the South is still a subject in our time. But if we line them up and the King of the North was to ascend after its death, the King of the South had to also ascend after its death. I just want to add one more thought, and this is that this is the connection of the King of the Kingdom. So it's Pius VI connected to the papacy. So when we come to this history, it has to be a King of the Kingdom. And who would we mark as the King of the South?
At that time?
Yes. In 1989 to 91.
Was it not him then?
Not yet. He comes.
The drunkard.
Oh, I don't know the name of the guy.
Gorbachev.
Oh yeah.
And where did Gorbachev lose his power?
At
91.
1989, wasn't it?
He's weakened here.
And
He loses it the same day the Soviet Union's dissolved. So he fell with the Soviet Union, they were connected. The minute he stood down, the Soviet Union ceased to exist and they lowered the flag. And there's an interesting newspaper article that was written in 91.
Sorry?
Sorry?
I was just going to say, is there an article? A
Yes.
paper on?
There's I'll look it up, but what they
Time
do...
magazine, was it?
This one I think is Time Magazine. No, this one isn't Time Magazine. This is the Washington Post. And what they do is they compare the reactions in 1989 with 1991. And they said 1989 was actually the much more significant event. When it comes to 1991, there was very little reaction in Russia. He says, when the Berlin Wall came down, everyone was out on the street. This was an event, 91, of the same kind of magnitude, but no one seemed to care. Even historically, it's 1989 that receives the majority of the attention, just like it was from 1989. They say, this is December 25 of 1991, and they say Gorbachev resigns today as President of the Soviet Union, transferring control of the country's nuclear arsenal to Boris Yeltsin, as the red Soviet flag atop the Kremlin was lowered for the last time. Immediately after announcing his resignation, the last leader of the world's first communist state signed a decree giving up command of the armed forces. Within half an hour, the white, red and blue Russian flag was flying above the Kremlin, symbolizing the end of the Soviet Union and the collapse of Soviet communism 74 years after the Bolshevik Revolution. So at the same time he steps down, the Soviet Union's dissolved.
And it was just like a normal day?
Yes.
Nobody saw it?
No. It's
When you
1989.
look at history.
Yes. So just by using the verse and taking the two parts, we can explain why we're marking 1989, because we're concentrating on the deadly wound of the King of the South instead of its actual death.
So Gorbachev's death is really a deadly wound then?
He didn't literally die, but he lost political power.
Yeah.
He stepped down as president. But then if we line them up in this way and say that the King of the North was to ascend, then we can see the King of the South has to come back. Because we're comparing the two.
Amazing the power.
With methodology and parables. This is what parables can do, what the whole history of pirates leads us to, which is Daniel 11, the first 15 verses. It's in the verse itself.
It's unbelievable. Beautiful.
I love parables. So, our first conclusion is that the King of the South has to come back. It has to ascend. After 1991, which is the history that we're looking at. And the second conclusion, I think, relates to captivity. So if we were to go back and put the story of captivity over this is comparing and contrasting the King of the North with the King of the South. But if we talked about captivity, I would suggest we can't compare the King of the North and the King of the South. We would instead have to compare the King of the North with the true King of the North. It becomes a separate parable.
Jesus.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Because the king of the south, there's no story of captivity in the king of the south, because the king of the south doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't belong to Satan, it doesn't belong to God. It's a separate entity. But the king of the north is a counterfeit of something. So we've compared and contrasted king of the north with king of the south. Our first compare and contrast is king of the north with the king of the south. But then we can do a separate compare and contrast and understand the king of the north counterfeit, the king of the north true. And this, to understand deadly wound and death, I think we can see through comparing king of the north and king of the south. But to see the story of captivity, I would suggest we have to go back to the story, not of Babylon, but of Israel. And then we can compare and contrast the experience of Babylon with that of Israel. Does that make sense? So,
I think the captivity one's a little bit, it can take you off track, and it's also a bit confusing, isn't it?
So I kind of don't want to go into all the complexities of
That's
captivity,
what I mean. Yeah.
but just to see the
See
concept.
the mechanisms of it if you look.
Sorry, Tess, I missed that. Couldn't recap quickly.
Sure. So this is one story. We're taking a different route now. This is the story of the king of the north and the king of the south, and we've compared and contrasted them, and it explains the deadly wound and the death. But then if we were to take the story of captivity, then I would suggest we don't compare and contrast king of the north and king of the south, but then we compare the captivity of Babylon with the captivity of Israel.
And that is because there's no captivity of Russia, of the Soviet Union, because they didn't belong to anybody.
No, captivity is a punishment by your boss.
Yeah, so I was trying to say Tom.
And who's the boss of the king of the south?
Yeah.
No one.
Someone. So you can't use it as to compare and contrast.
Oh, Jesus is the ultimate boss of all his subjects, even though they come under the seeds of Satan. Jesus is still the boss.
I don't think, how much control does he have over the king of the south?
Well, he says that violent and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, so he can take the breath out of their lungs when he wants. But he knows how they're going to manifest, obviously, and what they're going to do, but they're still fulfilling his divine plan and purposes.
But to fulfill the purpose of the great controversy, he can't interfere. Otherwise he's putting his finger on the scale against Satan, and that's not fighting fair.
I don't press that bit, say that again. Because he's already laid the plans out, and his people have got to have the faith to fulfill their part. But the devil is just trying to...
If I was playing chess with you, I don't get to move over to your side and move your pieces.
Got an idea, sorry.
Otherwise I'm not
Yeah, he still gives them
fair.
freedom of choice, but they have limits, and when they go over certain bounds, then it causes reactions. Because we've got spirit of prophecy quote, men are almost past the bounds of God's limit. And so I should imagine that all goes through history too. And so when they go so far, they just get taken out of the way anyway. But they're allowed to manifest their true satanicness.
Yeah.
And a lot of them in history have manifested the true satanicness.
Yeah, I think he has to let Satan move his own pieces. But when it comes to the king of the south, who's their boss?
Satan is, they're working for the devil.
Why?
So he's a seed of Satan.
Who's holding back the king of the north right now?
Islam, is it?
And the king of the south. He's the number one enemy of the king of the north. He's the one enemy of the papacy. So in what perspective did Satan raise up the king of the south? Why would he do that? If the king of the south is something that's controlled by Satan.
I don't know. They could, look at Trump and Putin. They're enemies but friends in one sense.
Soon to be much more.
So that the situation can get to such an extent where you know, they just make alliances to still accomplish their objective, or to try to.
Did you say the
I
Satan's
don't know
not
what
the
it
boss?
is.
Did you say Satan's not the boss of the King of the South? He is not. He is. He's not. Oh, God.
He would be the King of the South is holding him back right now. But like when, perhaps we can finish
Satan.
with this discussion,
Okay.
because I think we can develop that argument. So if we compare the counterfeit, the King of the North and the King of the South, the true and the counterfeit, then we have to line up the captivities. So if we talked about the captivity of God's people, why did they go into captivity?
Because of their sin.
Because they were disobedient. So why did the papacy go into captivity in 1989?
Because it never
Sorry,
fulfilled.
1799.
Because it never
Because
fulfilled
it was
the last
disobedient.
25 years of the 1,260 years. The
God.
persecution
Write that
stopped
down.
25 years early.
Yes, when?
But the date, well, 25 years back from 1798.
So if I marked the date, can you tell me what happened? Why did persecution stop?
Well, they changed form, didn't they?
I think you told us about
Was it
this.
because of Clovis? No, not Clovis.
So in 1773 they abolished the Jesuits. So they have a boss that's Satan for 1260 years, and he's given them two job functions: control the kings of Europe and kill God's people.
Yeah.
And in 1773 they're given a
stop.
choice, an actual choice, where they didn't have to abolish the Jesuit order. They could have, instead, to keep the kings happy, they could have given the kings a portion of their land. So they had two choices: either give the kings a portion of papal land and money, they would have to give up some temporal prosperity and keep fulfilling their job function, or do they abolish the Jesuits and keep their temporal prosperity? And I think that's the same choice that came to God's people, and they chose their temporal prosperity over their job function. So the papacy abolished the Jesuit order, they stopped controlling the kings, and they stopped persecuting God's people in 1773.
They apostatized.
They apostatized against who?
Their leader. Their yeah.
Yeah, their boss.
Yeah.
Yes.
You said Satan is not the boss of the King of the South. Is that because Satan wants the papacy to consecrate Russia?
So when we come to Fatima, 1917, what is Satan saying?
You've apostatized. I need to find someone else to do my job.
That too.
Oh.
But the second part of Fatima, what is he saying to them?
Back to the papacy. And then keep him.
The King of the South is coming up, and it's your number one enemy. It's my number one enemy. Because the number one enemy of the papacy, the number one enemy of Satan at that time.
Yeah.
And he's saying you need to kill it now.
Oh,
It's almost like the dragon saying it was ready to devour the child before it was born. 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution hasn't even happened yet. It's not Russia isn't even communist yet. And the dragon is ready to devour the child, the King of the South, before it's even born. Because the King of the South is his number one threat. We're not doing anything in 1917. Yes.
But the whole of Daniel 2 is all Satan's kingdom, and they're all kings of those kingdoms.
What is Babylon?
And demons, like, even though like, they're all demons, there's still demons that are not compatible with other demons, they still hate each other, but it's only because of the Islam situation that actually brings them together to try to fulfill a purpose. So there's still Satan's agents, even though they're...
I can't follow. The statue of Daniel 2, who's the head?
Babylon.
The second? Medo Persia, the third?
Greece.
Fourth? Which one of them is the King of the South?
Paganism.
Where's Egypt?
Paganism. It's spiritualism, paganism, isn't it?
Where's Egypt in that statue? It's not there. There is no King of the South in the statue of Daniel 2. Egypt doesn't exist in that statue. You have Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, Rome, never the King of the South.
Yeah, but Egypt doesn't accept the blood of the lamb by faith. They do human sacrifice, offering the pulpating heart to the sun god. So, I mean, they can't say that that's a divine agency leading the type of people, because they're still
Let's compare and contrast something different. So if we go back
Egypt's
to the
Babylon, isn't it? Really?
Egypt was Babylon's #1 threat.
Yeah. But
They're both
modern.
contending with each other. They're contending for the highest place, but they're all under demons. But holy angels may be trying to work with them as well, like Cyrus.
If we could compare and contrast something different, and we go back to the study of the nature of man, what do we learn about the nature of man?
It's threefold.
The key part, I think, the beginning of understanding that study is to see I can be good without God.
Yeah, we'll get
By
that from
exercising my
Hazaroras,
will, I can be good without God.
type of Christ.
If I can be good without God, can I be evil without Satan?
Yes.
So can the King of the South be evil without Satan needing his help? Can Egypt be evil without Satan?
But he still puts them all under. If it's not. So you're saying he's become his own demon, where he's not being led by, because the human mind, we're told, is influenced by holy angels or evil angels, even though we're given the freedom.
What evil angel influences Satan in heaven? Or could he do that all on his own?
Well, that's the mystery of iniquity, isn't it? Why he became what he is.
Sorry, can you just clarify? Are you saying the King of the South has got no boss, basically? So he's not got a boss, or he's just in the flesh?
I think he can get used like a weapon, but I don't think he has. He's not part of.
Evil angels can use him whenever they want, whenever they can get him into a position.
Let's get to the point, because I think I keep interrupting the same point, which is, they're all wicked, we know that, but he's trying to make a point about it.
If we go back to the nature of man, then we have to be able to do also the counter of that. We're good without God, we're evil without Satan. We can be good without the influence of heavenly angels. That was the nature of man's study. Which means we can be good without satanic angels or demons. So we can be evil without satanic angels or demons. It's just the other side of the same page. So who's controlling Putin and making him fight against? Who was controlling Stalin when he took away all of Eastern Europe from the papacy? Who was controlling Napoleon when he took the Pope captive? Who's doing that? Because if we say that's Satan, that's
God's providence.
So we don't put it down to God or Satan in that imagery. Because I think I would have answered that question before you asked it. Before you asked it, but actually, well, Beelzebub fights Beelzebub. And I think that's probably what Richard's trying to say, Satan fights Satan. So it's all because of mass destruction. Because they're one level.
but he wants a
If the
kingdom.
kingdom is divided against itself, it shall fall. So
He wants to say that again. He wants the kingdom.
He wants a kingdom. He doesn't want to destroy his own kingdom because the papacy is the only chance he's got.
So he wants the papacy. So the concept of the King of the South is led by, if we're not going to say Satan or God, we'll just say his adversary agenda.
I think the King of the South is just totally redundant. They don't want God, they don't want Satan.
Not anything.
They don't want a church.
And practically we know they can't have nothing. They are Satan.
Yeah. Satan can't control them, they don't accept religion.
And that's why he wants to take them under his power.
Yes.
Yeah.
And everything we say about the King of the South, I would also attribute to Islam, who's controlling Islam. Because it's the King of the South and Islam that are holding back the King of the North.
But ultimately, they are under the control of evil. It's just they're not under control of the master of evil, if that makes sense.
I think they're able to be evil all on their own.
Okay.
really, I've got to think about that. I've got to think about that one.
Yeah, I have to think about that.
But
We
that
did
did
this
come
study
out,
with
it's the nature of
Paminda
man like
here.
that. I remember that.
And it was very challenging.
Because there is a root to
That's
evil.
right, they're own gods.
They're evil. Satan is evil in and of himself, but the King of the South isn't evil in and of himself. He's still created in the image of God, but he's choosing to do evil. So ultimately, he's doing his own agenda, but his method, his ideas of evil is coming from Satan. It's just like a child who just wants to do its own thing, even though it's, where does he get the root to do his own thing? Which is,
I think he's got the will to decide that. Putin has the will to decide to kill all his political enemies, establish a dictatorship and launch a war against religion. He has that, Stalin had all of that potential within himself to exercise his will and do evil without the influence of a demon.
Well, but to kill someone is the influence of a demon, surely, because you've got...
We can't do that.
You've got that book, what is it? Great is the victory. The war is real, and so is the victory. And that documents all these different named these demons coming out of this girl who cast against the wall in an Adventist hospital. It names all these evil angels, all these demons. So when this acts,
I think the principle is we're drawn away and enticed by your own lusts. And I think we all think that, it's only Satan tempting us that makes us do wickedness. I think Tess's point is trying to make, which is what Pamela was trying to make here, is that Steps to Christ, we studied for months about this, that we can do good without God's power. And people go, we're getting challenged, but we need to keep it for months. What we need God for, that whole concept, is that we have got power of choice, and that we've got this inherent, no, I shouldn't say inherent, sin condition. We've got a bent to sin. With our own lust, and that draws us away and entices us, and that would happen in hell whether Satan was there or not if we don't conquer it, if we don't choose to serve God.
Because our own will can do bad things, just like it can do good things. It's the opposite side of the same page of the nature of God.
As much as I see that, aren't we saying that there's good, there's bad, and there's middle ground? If we take that view, and I'm sure we've probably established all of this anyway, so I'm probably going to be wrong. But even though you can do good of yourself, where does that come from? It ultimately comes from God anyway, or are we saying it just comes from you? Because that means there is kind of a little middle ground there, isn't it? No.
Yeah, I was going to. Sorry, that's my point. I think I was going to say that it's still bad, but why is it bad? It's the motive behind it. So you can choose to do wickedness without Satan tempting you, and sometimes you can be tempted by Satan to fall into sin, and it's all the wicked. But what's the inherent motivation behind that? Or what's the power behind that? So, and I don't think we recognise that we have got full choice.
Yeah.
Adam had full choice to do good, full choice to do evil. Without Satan came on the scene.
We just like to blame Satan.
Exactly.
And I'm sorry, but you can be without Satan and still sin.
But I suppose Thomas's point is that when someone does do good, isn't all good come from God? Ultimately, you can't really do good without God.
I don't blame Satan for anything.
Even those without God can do good.
But I'm saying, I think that's the whole point for us. That's the point. You can do good without God, because people in the world do good without God.
And then it kind of comes into this perspective.
angels can do
You
good.
have all of the popes after 1773, 1799 forward. All these popes are in rebellion to their boss. That doesn't make them good.
Just like
So,
All the popes are in rebellion against God. It doesn't make them do good.
The popes in this history, they're in rebellion to their boss.
Yeah.
That doesn't make them good. That papal infallibility comes in this history.
Oh no, it doesn't make
They're still of the same mindset. They're still wanting to regain their own power. They're still wicked. Claiming to be God on earth, doing all of those things, but they're in total rebellion.
And they're in rebellion to Satan.
Yes.
Still not true, they're still wicked.
In what way?
They're not doing what he asks them to do.
In 1773, they let go of their job function. When we think of Israel, we go into a Laodicean condition. We choose temporal prosperity over our job function, and we can live good lives as Christians, but Laodicean Christians. And we can use our will, live moral lives. And that's what the papacy is doing through this history. They're continuing to make the same choices as popes, as Catholics. None of that changes. But they're in a Laodicean condition because they're not fulfilling their job function, which is to control the kings of Europe, persecute God's people. So we can go into a Laodicean condition and they can go into a Laodicean condition.
Like the opposite.
do.
It's like the opposite, yeah.
So if I'm hearing correctly, are we saying that the king of the south is choosing to sin like Adam chose to sin while he wasn't under the power of Satan? Because he wasn't under the power of Satan, and he chose to sin. So can we use that application and bring it down to the king of the south, where he's not under no God, but he's sinning?
Yeah, or Satan himself in heaven. He didn't need that influence. or the popes in this history who are, we're coming to, and if we come to our conclusion, then I think we'll have a couple more.
Well, could you say he sinned against the king of the north anyway? Because Christ is the original king of the north.
Yeah.
So he sinned against the king of the north.
Yes.
Just quickly, I can't remember it word for word, but there's a spirit of prophecy where it says evil angels have changed to holy angels, well, personate holy angels, and that's how basically how the papacy will get in at the end. And that concept where people can be led without angels will lead, well, because of the time when Protestants will reject the reality of angels. So that's obviously coming from that thought.
And where's
being
in
and
history?
it says that in Spirit of Prophecy somewhere.
Okay, I want to come back to that point if you don't let me forget. So the king of the north, the counterfeit, the king of the north, the true. If we just compared and contrasted them. So the
So you
papacy,
say king of the north true there is God, or is it Israel as a kingdom?
I was kind of trying to focus on the kingdoms.
So
Because
it's
we
Israel
don't
as
see
a kingdom
Jesus go into captivity.
as a symbol of.
What
So
about
we're saying that Israel there is king of the north
Yes.
because they're serving God, who's the king of the north. Or
Yes.
he took on humanity, which is a captivity.
So if we went back to ancient Israel, they went into apostasy. After going to apostasy, they're brought into captivity. And we see that in the 1260 years. So we've compared and contrasted king of the north, king of the south. And then we see that this isn't just a deadly wound, this is a captivity.
sorry, Tess, we missed Sabbath.
Oh.
Sabbath. Yes,
Time to have a coming in.
it was already time as well.
10 minutes ago.
So what time's it coming in?
It's 15.
8:01.
8:08.
8:01, yeah.
It's 8:08 up here.
We only
I
have
put
a
Abigail
little
in
bit more
801.
and we can close.
808 and dialogue.
You still
Oh,
could be on
still not.
Well, like it's
So until that point,
Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful Sabbath and these lessons we've had here, that we can come together and we can see the light of the midnight cry message. We thank you for your messenger. We pray that you will bless her and strengthen her. And we pray, Lord, that you will be with us this Sabbath and to open our minds, Lord, and our hearts, so we can take this message deep into our hearts and let it transform our lives, Lord, before it's too late. We thank you in the precious holy name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Say that point again, that last point.
so if we compare the true king of the north with the counterfeit king of the north, if we were to compare ancient Babylon and ancient Israel, they had to go into captivity before they had to go into apostasy before they were led into captivity. And then they died in captivity. And we see that this history, and we can bring that into a more solid argument, that this history after 1798 is the papal version of the 1260. So, first of all, they led into captivity in the 1260, and then they went into their own captivity, which was their version of the 1260 years. So then if we were to see the 1260 years, God's people come out of captivity. And we compared and contrasted that with the papacy. We would have to mark the coming out. In 1798, God's people come out of captivity. That's the 1260. And this is what we mark as modern Israel. So if we were to compare modern Israel with modern Babylon, what can that teach us? Because first of all there's a captivity, then there's a coming out of that captivity. And we've said that in 1798, modern Israel comes out of captivity. So there has to be a point in time up here. This is where they come out. The papacy comes out of captivity.
Sorry, what's the question?
What can we learn from comparing and contrasting modern Israel and modern Babylon? This is the history of modern Israel. I wouldn't.
Because they don't have captivity.
So this is modern Israel. They come out of captivity in 1798. Then modern Babylon is going to come out of history at a point in time.
So they go into captivity then?
We've marked when they went into captivity, 1798. Now we're discussing this history. When they come out of captivity. If we were to look at modern Israel as coming out of captivity in 1798.
So while modern Israel is going in, coming out of captivity, is Babylon going in captivity?
Yes. How many histories do we have for modern Israel? Two. What are they?
Ancient Israel, modern Israel.
Millerite history, and what's the second one? So Millerite history, then they go into captivity, and we could mark this as Laodicea. And then they come out of captivity again.
1989.
And it's the history of the 144 of the church triumph. So modern Israel goes into captivity. So Israel goes into captivity. When it comes out as modern Israel, it comes out twice. We have two histories, Alpha and Omega. Millerites 144,000. So when we discuss modern Babylon, and we compare and contrast, it went into captivity in 1798. This is modern Israel. What about modern Babylon? What brought the Millerites out of captivity? Ellen White, I'm just going to say the first, second, third. We have three angels' messages. I'll just put three angels' messages. A three-step prophetic testing message. So what is going to bring modern Babylon out of captivity?
Three-step prophetic. No, three-step.
Three-step prophetic testing message.
Which is
When do they get their three-step prophetic testing message?
Fatima time, please.
Fatima.
I'm not going to give you the dates, so I'm going to say Fatima.
They have a three-step prophetic testing message. Yeah. And there's three parts to the message of Fatima. The first one is fear.
Glory.
The third one is judgment. And the second one is the point of that subject. What was the point of Fatima?
To bring into unity the King of the South.
Yes. To take the King of the South, or Russia. Before it even became the King of the South.
Can I just make a point on that?
Yeah.
When I did your study on this, and there was a verse that came to mind, because I think someone asked the same question: how can the King in the South want to take? How can the papacy want to destroy communism, or Satan destroy communism? Because they're both evil. And John 10:16 comes to mind when I think of it, and it says, "And other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also must I bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd." So I get from that reading, obviously we know it's a spiritual aspect to us, but here is that there's many religions or cults around the world, and Satan needs to bring them all into one his fold, so he could basically be king over them. Basically, that verse I think rings resonance with that concept as well.
There's no point if they're in a different fold. He needs to bring them
into one fold. Yeah. And that's how I now, because I couldn't really answer the question when people said, "How can Satan war against Satan?" Richard said, "Satan divide himself into his kingdom," but it makes sense, that verse. He brings them all into one.
Yes.
Because
Which
that's what
means
God
that
does.
they aren't his fold.
No, but he wants to bring them into one. Yeah.
Yes.
So I see that.
But
So
history.
that verse. Oh, go on then, Gary.
You
You go
go
after
on,
your husband
Richard,
and I'll
no.
wait. Oh no, because your husband just spoke. You can speak.
It doesn't matter. What's that mean?
I was going to say the history of between Hitler and Stalin and the guy in Spain, that it all had different ideology, and this is why you can see how they literally were against each other. They didn't agree, and it's why you needed to try and bring them under one ideology.
Yes.
So that's why I understand it.
Satan
What
has
you're saying.
all the same challenges God has.
Yeah.
He needs unity in his kingdom.
And ultimately, he wants that so he can persecute God's people.
Yeah.
Because they won't cooperate in persecuting God's people. They'll persecute other people perhaps, but they won't persecute God's people if they're not on one accord.
Which is why this is useful. Which is why Islam is useful. The King of the South is useful because they're just distracted.
Yes, because they won't do the job if they're not in one accord.
Yes.
I think it's
So can you apply the principle where I think it was Paul says until he'd be taken out of the way, where paganism was standing in the way of the papalism coming into the place. So paganism had to be taken out of the way for the papalism, like 1,200 either side, 1,260 years, paganism and papalism. So Putin's like type of war paganism, but it has to be taken out of the way because it's preventing the papalism coming back in power.
I think that would
So
be
is
talking
it- it's
still
the same
about the
kind
King of the North. So I wouldn't quite compare it.
There wouldn't be no comparison there.
Because paganism is the King of the North and papalism is the King of the North.
but there's contending, still contending with each other to a degree, but not.
I can see the idea of
parallelism.
restraint. Yeah, I can see the idea.
Okay, so
of restraint.
Thomas's thought was a better thought.
I don't understand what you mean when you said Islam. So you made a point about Islam. They're not doing something. I think Emma mentioned he needs them, or just clarify that point again.
They're also useful in that they're restraining. Useful to us in that they're distracting.
I see.
What would Trump do right
Okay,
now if
yeah.
he had no Russia against him? If he had no fight with Muslims,
you'll come to religion.
he'd have nothing to distract him. We would, I think, be in danger much more.
Okay.
If we look at this history, 1989 to 9/11, and Natalie, you already mentioned this. But what's 1989? If we bring it into our war.
Deadly wound?
What's the deadly wound in after the resurrection when they're all fighting again? You have Trump and Putin. Where would we mark the deadly wound?
Raffia.
Panic.
November this year. The deadly one on the start.
This is the defeat of the King of the South.
Oh, okay, so that's Panium. Yeah.
Panium. So if this is Panium, what happens directly after Panium? Sunday Law. So what's the King of the South been doing all through this history?
Restraining the Sunday law.
Restraining the King of the North.
Oh, King of the North, yeah.
Because it's as it goes down that you see the seventh head come up. It's almost,
So it's standing in the way. Yeah.
King of the South is standing in the way. But if we have the three angels' messages in Millerite history, if we were just to mark this as 1818 and see the three angels' messages formed, come together, those three angels' messages were directly for their own history, not for our history. That Miller's message wasn't for us, it was for the Millerites. So Fatima can't be for 2023. It has to be for 1917. So their three angels' messages has to be relevant to their history, just like the Millerites' three angels' messages were relevant to their history.
Counterfeit.
Yes. Fatima can't be a message that's for 120 years later.
So what's our message for our time?
It's all on its own.
You mean us or Babylon?
So you're saying the Fatima message is for the 1917, the Millerites' message is for the Millerites. But what would be our message for our time?
I can see how we take this history and apply it.
Yeah.
But when it was originally given,
Yeah,
it wasn't
okay.
kind of just given into a vacuum to work for people for another 100 years.
Okay.
So are we okay with that?
Oh, sorry, I think I missed that last point. So that they're given a message that's relevant to their history. Why is it relevant to their history? Because Russia's about to rise. So
If we were
making.
to talk about Miller's increase of knowledge, it wasn't just to kind of be put away in a capsule till the 144,000 came up. It was relevant for a movement that was underway, that was currently underway. So for their three angels' messages, it had to be for a movement that was currently underway in 1917. So whenever the papacy comes back up, I'm not meaning to go into try and prove it. I'm saying that they come back in 1899. And these messages of Fatima, which is 1917, are for this first history. And it has to happen in two parts. First of all, you have the papal resurrection in its Alpha and then in its Omega. And that Miller writes they failed, or Alpha history has to fail. So this is the whole story again of Pyrrhus and World War II, but again we're just taking it back to a compare and contrast.
It's amazing that you can see that failure there and compare it with Miller.
Yes. 1844 is a disappointment. Disappointment and failure. 1945 is disappointment and failure.
Well, why? We'll just go. What was that again?
1945?
Yeah.
Because the papacy was trying to do their work or use the beast of Germany. And Germany failed.
To bring down Russia. And they actually went into alliance with them in the end. Yeah.
Yes.
Fair enough,
That's Pope Pius XII. Pope Pius XII is raised up in 1899, Bill is raised up in 1798.
Oh, okay, wow.
So it is, Fatima is seriously relevant for us in that sense.
Yes.
Even though it was the counterfeit and it was the work to attack the king of the north, king of the south, it's still seriously relevant for us to see.
It's their Millerite message.
Okay. Got a prophecy from the 60s describing kind of like a city going missing, kind of describing.
So this kind of takes us back around to the same conclusions that we had with Pyrrhus, that there's this history of World War II, because this is the history of the first and the second angels' messages. Ellen White just says there's the first and the second, and then she says that the third begins here and continues through this history until it's empowered. 1899 to 1945 is the history of World War I to World War II, and then you can see the World War III beginning with the Cold War, continue through history till it's empowered. You can use World War I and World War II the same way we use the first and second angels' messages. And then if we consider the two charts, we have, in this history, we have two charts developed. We talk about the two tables of stone we talk about the 10 Commandments, we talk about the two tables of stone. And how many commandments are there on the first? And on the second? So when we come to World War I and World War II, how many years is the first? How many years is the second? It's just counterfeit. He's doing the same thing under World War I and World War II. And if you go into a hall in Australia, all our halls have two charts on the back listing all the men in that community who died in World War I and World War II. They're built practically like that, two charts on opposite sides of the room. And they list World War I, World War II, and then the years. That's how I first saw this, is standing in a hall, staring at the back, seeing two charts. Because World War I and World War II are the counterfeit of the first and the second.
Yes, that's here as well.
World War One.
You have that here too?
Yeah.
Sorry, what do we have? What?
When you have memorials, you have like World War I, World War II, like even like Court Henry, I think I saw it once.
Yeah, I think it was.
You look disturbed.
Oh no, I got it. Are you finished?
Yes, I
Only
can't make it.
part of the world is
Okay. From 1798, if you add 2 to 8, it brings you to 2018.
Sorry, what was that?
From 1798,
Yes,
you add 220, it brings you to 2018.
yes.
I'm saying with 1799, that would bring it to 2019. So we know 2018, you know, we're in the midnight cry. So could you say in 2019 we should expect some false counterfeit midnight cry?
I'm not sure if they're paralleling us that well now, because I think we had a major head start in 1989.
Okay.
When we come into history in 1989, they fail under their movement under John Paul II is a complete failure. They free Eastern Europe, but Eastern Europe says we don't want the papacy, we don't want your control. It's all failure.
Okay.
So we come out. I don't think they come out yet.
Okay.
He was upset more when Solidarity went underground, his own nation going under martial law, because it really disturbed the Pope's plans.
Yeah, they decided
I mean,
they wanted
the
freedom.
peace plans and the devil's plans. Yeah.
Yeah, Eastern Europe decided they wanted freedom. They didn't want another dictator, and John Paul II thought that they'd make another dictator in the Catholic Church, and they wouldn't. He got really, really angry.
And that really upset him, because you can see that was the devil's plan, really, to use him, and that failed miserably.
Didn't we have a dictator in, didn't they have in the Vietnam War they had a dictator, didn't they? It was South Vietnam.
I just see dictators everywhere now. I'm not sure where it doesn't have a
a Catholic, a strict Catholic.
Okay.
And in Rwanda, I heard from somebody that they had the government the government were doing all the administration for that country, so they had a lot to do with that massacre as well.
Yeah. So the reason we did this one is that I just wanted to do the two compare and contrast. We looked at King of the North and King of the South, and we saw that there was a deadly wound and a death. And then if there's a death, there must be a resurrection for the King of the South as well. And then if we compare modern Israel and modern Babylon, we see what that resurrection looks like. That this resurrection up here, after 1799, has to be in two parts, an alpha and an omega, just like it does in 1798. But we can't say that there's an alpha and omega of the King of the South after 1991, because the King of the South never went into captivity. We can't compare and contrast the King of the South with modern Israel. So that allows us to go into the history of World War II and see that what we're observing is prophetic for our history, because World War II is going to show us World War III. And it's in World War II that they attempt to fulfill really the second angel's message. Is that it? And then we also discussed if their second angel's message is to kill the King of the South while it's in formation, who's forming it? Because if it's Satan, that's counterintuitive. Yes.
When you said 1989 says we've got an advantage, there's a spirit prophecy quote saying that the enemy, the devil, was stolen the marks on God's people, but you're saying that that's not taking place yet.
If we were to follow up these histories and keep lining them up, if we were to line up, because we've lined up 1798, 1899, 1818, 1917, 1845, 1945, 1844, 1945. So we're actually seeing these dates line up.
Yeah.
Not perfectly. The counterfeit never lines up perfectly. But we can keep going. We can see 1850 is 1950, 1862. 1863 is 1962. We can continue to do that, and if we continue to do that, we see 1989 for God's people is for the counterfeit, they're 1888. And 1888 was a failure.
There were a few men stood in the way of the whole congregation getting the Holy Spirit.
The last bit again, so in 1863, what would we make that?
1962.
What happened then? That's 22.
They went in a secret deal with the Soviet Union, the papacy.
The papacy did.
So that they completely let go of their prophetic message in 1962.
What is that again? The secret deal, what do we call it?
Consecrate
They have a name for it. I can't remember it because it's based on a town. There was the city in Europe where the representatives of the Pope met with representatives of the Soviet Union. And they went into a secret deal that they would not condemn communism at the Second Vatican Council if the Soviet Union allowed the Eastern Orthodox Church to come and be represented. So what they've done is they've abandoned their prophetic message because they refused to fulfill the second part. So like 1863, we abandoned our prophetic message. They did the exact same thing in 1962.
But probably has no correlation. But is it similar to like what Clovis did? Or sorry, not Clovis. Constantine, just kind of instead of killing them, let's just join them. That was a bit of a compromise, wasn't it? Or no?
I'm sure, I don't know that history.
Oh, okay, yeah. Basically, you know, when they were killing the Christians and they realised we can't kill them anymore, let's just join them and then came into the church.
Because the popes in that history are actually pro-communist, more so than they rejected their prophet. They wouldn't meet with Lucia. Lucia is in this history. You have William Miller, but you don't just have William Miller. You have Ellen White. And in this history, you don't just have Pope Pius XII. You have Lucia. Lucia was the young girl who received this message of Fatima.
Oh, yeah.
And she doesn't end in 1917. She's a prophet for the Catholic Church. She died in 2005. And all through this history, they rejected their prophet. Particularly when they stopped.
Like our Ellen G. White.
Yeah. If Ellen White through this history, they had Lucia through this history.
Even had their own William Miller, didn't they?
I forgot, is there something important in 2005 in our message? You know, because she died.
I'm not sure how we line up the dates now, because we see these don't line. 1798 and 1899 are perfect. And 2005 is a way mark, 2004 is a way mark. So I'm wondering if
where you could put it.
I'm not too sure. But John Paul II died the same year and that one's apart.
But isn't 2005 when our message started accepting the time setting? Because the chiasm went from 22nd of October 1844 to 1863. So it was on time. The spirit of the process is no time. It's on time from 1844.
Okay. So, conclusion that first of all, our first conclusion was that the King of the South had to ascend after 1991. Our second one was that when modern Babylon comes back, it must come back in an Alpha and Omega history. And we see the first Alpha history in the history of the world wars. So that's kind of like, should we go to pray, or if anyone had any other thoughts?
So with modern Babylon, so what's the Omega? Is it World War? Because the Alpha
I would suggest our history.
It is our history. So the Alpha is Fatima and World War II. Is that the Alpha?
I think you could mark both world wars. 1 and 2.
As the Alpha. I thought Fatima was the Alpha.
No, 1, 2, 3.
Because the Alpha is Millerite history.
Definitely lost me on that.
The Alpha for us is Millerite history.
And the end of
Yes.
I thought we were paralleling Millerite to Fatima.
Alpha and Omega.
Yes, that would be their
Context.
that would be their message.
Similarity.
But there's a 46-year history here. 1899 to 1945 is a 46-year history. So it's the message, but you also have a 46-year history.
So we didn't have the World Wars as well as the Fatima history.
Yes.
It's got two things going on.
Yes. It's. I remember. I think I did this at. Where was I? Once, and one girl came up and one thing I think I can't put it in her words. She said it neatly. Is we see the counterfeit, how ugly it is. Not just in the fact of the world wars and what happened, but also in the fact that you draw their lines and it doesn't look beautiful. It's disjointed. It doesn't actually have the symmetry that you see in the lines of the truth. Even though it's still locked into place, it doesn't have the symmetry.